I've always thought of myself as a loyal man. Not perfect, nobody really is, but loyal in the ways that mattered. I had been married for 7 years to Anna, a woman who had stood by me through my career struggles, my restless phases, and my stubbornness when it came to family arguments. We weren't a picture-perfect couple, not like you see on social media feeds, but we had something solid. At least, I believed we did. Our life had a rhythm. Monday through Friday, I would wake up before her, shower, make some coffee, and head off to work. Anna, who freelanced from home, would roll out of bed later, start her day slowly, and then greet me with dinner when I came back in the evening. Some nights, we would watch shows together on the couch, other nights, she'd bury herself in her projects while I scrolled endlessly on my phone. There were weekends at her parents' place, occasional dinners with friends, and once-a-year trips to the seaside that had long lost their spark. It wasn't unhappy, it was comfortable. But sometimes comfort is its own kind of trap. You stop noticing the person you share a bed with. You start taking their presence for granted, their touch for routine, their body as something you assume will always be there when you turn around. And that's where we were, married, still affectionate in a surface-level way, but lacking that edge of desire that had defined our early years. So when my company announced a mandatory 3-day business seminar in another city, I thought of it as nothing more than a break from the monotony. A chance to get away, to change the scenery, maybe even clear my head a little. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't looking for temptation. But temptation, as I would soon find out, has a way of finding you when you least expect it. Anna had kissed me goodbye at the station. It was a soft, distracted kiss, the kind couples give each other after years together. She told me not to forget to text her when I arrived. I promised I would. She mentioned that she might visit her sister while I was gone. I said that was a good idea. We both smiled, hugged, and that was it. There was no lingering moment, no spark of I'll miss you in our eyes, just routine. On the train, I found myself staring out of the window, the landscape blurring by, and wondered when exactly we had lost that fire. Was it gradual, sneaking in through small habits and silences, or had it vanished in one specific moment we never noticed? I didn't know. But I felt the absence of it, heavy in my chest. By the time I reached the hotel where our company had booked us, I was ready to slip into autopilot, check in, attend the workshops, have polite dinners with colleagues, and wait for the trip to end. But as I stood in the lobby, luggage at my side, waiting for my room key, I heard a familiar laugh. It was Julia. Julia had joined our office 2 years earlier, a marketing manager with sharp instincts and a sharper tongue. Everyone liked her, though some whispered that she was too direct or too bold. I had always admired that about her, she never seemed to hold back what she was thinking, and yet, somehow, she managed to stay warm, approachable. She had a way of looking at you when you spoke, as if your words carried weight, as if she wasn't just hearing but truly listening. I noticed her long before she ever noticed me. That was the truth. In meetings, I'd sometimes catch myself watching her when she presented, the confidence in her voice, the way her hands moved when she emphasized a point. It wasn't just physical attraction, though she was undeniably attractive, it was something else, something about the energy she carried with her. So when I turned around in the hotel lobby and saw her laughing with another colleague, I felt a strange flutter in my chest. She was wearing a dark dress, simple but elegant, her hair down instead of tied back like she usually had it at the office. She noticed me after a moment and smiled, raising her hand in a casual wave. "Hey, you made it," she said, walking over. "Yeah," I replied, suddenly aware of how tired my voice sounded compared to her brightness. Train wasn't too bad. We exchanged a few words, nothing important, just small talk about the trip and the schedule for tomorrow. But as she spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was already different. Something about the way she held my gaze lingered too long, the way her lips curved into a smile that seemed a touch more personal than professional. I brushed it off. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe I was just restless, projecting my own dissatisfaction with my marriage onto a harmless conversation. But the seed was planted, and I carried it with me as I made my way to my room. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, scrolling through my phone, and exchanging a couple of brief messages with Anna. She asked if I'd eaten. I told her I had. She said she was watching a show and heading to bed soon. That was the end of it. But instead of sleeping, I kept replaying Julia's laugh in my head, the way her eyes had caught mine in the lobby, and the possibility, just the possibility, that something could happen on this trip. At that point, I still thought I could handle it. I had no idea how wrong I was. The first day of the seminar was exactly what I had expected: long presentations, PowerPoint slides filled with numbers nobody would remember, and polite applause at the end of each session. By the afternoon, my mind was numb. I caught myself doodling in the margins of my notebook, anything to stay awake. Julia sat 2 rows ahead of me. Every now and then, she turned slightly, either to whisper something to the colleague beside her or to glance around the room. Once, her eyes met mine, and she gave me a small, knowing smile as if to say, "Yes, this is boring as hell, isn't it?" I chuckled under my breath, and something about that silent exchange warmed me more than the endless cups of coffee I had been drinking. By the end of the day, when our manager suggested dinner at a restaurant nearby, the idea of wine and decent food sounded like salvation. A group of 12 of us headed out together, still in our business clothes but loosened, ties undone, jackets left in hotel rooms. The restaurant was cozy, with low lighting and wooden beams across the ceiling. We filled a long table, ordering bottles of red and white wine before we even opened the menus. I ended up sitting directly across from Julia. It wasn't planned, but when she slid into her chair, looked up, and grinned at me, it felt inevitable. Finally, she said, raising her glass once the wine was poured. "To surviving day 1. "To surviving," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. Dinner was loud, filled with laughter and overlapping conversations. At first, the talk was about the seminar, which speaker was too dull, which presentation had at least a shred of value. But as the wine flowed, the topic shifted. People shared travel stories, embarrassing office moments, little glimpses of their personal lives. Julia was magnetic. She told a story about a disastrous first date where her date had shown up with his mother, something that had the whole table roaring with laughter. She listened to others intently, nodding, laughing at the right moments, and drawing more out of them with questions. But what struck me most was how often her attention drifted back to me. She'd ask about my opinion, direct her stories my way, lean forward so that our conversation felt private even though we were surrounded by people. Her hand brushed the stem of her wine glass, her nails painted a deep shade of red, and when she laughed, her eyes held mine longer than they should have. At one point, she asked, "So, how's married life treating you?" The question came casually, but there was something behind it, a spark of curiosity that lingered. I hesitated. "Good," I said. "Stable, you know. 7 years now." 7 years, she repeated, tilting her head slightly. "That's impressive." "Impressive or boring?" I tried to joke, though my voice came out more serious than I intended. She smiled, but it wasn't mocking, it was softer. "Depends on the marriage, I guess." I didn't push further. But I felt the weight of her words sitting between us, unspoken, like an invitation I wasn't ready to acknowledge. By the time dessert was served, most of the group was well past tipsy. Some were talking loudly, others slurring their words. Our manager had slipped into a comfortable drunkenness, telling the same story for the 3rd time. Julia and I had drifted into our own conversation, quieter, more personal. She told me about her family, how she rarely saw them because they lived in another country. I told her about Anna, about how she worked from home, how we had settled into a routine. Julia listened closely, chin resting on her hand, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like you're missing something?" she asked suddenly. The question hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, closed it again, and finally said, "Sometimes." "Don't you?" She nodded slowly. "All the time." We held each other's gaze for a beat too long. My chest tightened, and I quickly looked away, pretending to sip my wine. But the thought lingered. Here we were, two people admitting, without quite saying it, that our lives weren't as full as they should have been. By the time the check arrived, the group had thinned. A few people had already left, too tired or too drunk to stay. The rest of us stumbled out into the cool night air, laughter echoing down the street. Julia was at my side. She slipped her arm through mine casually, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. My body stiffened at first, but I didn't pull away. Her touch sent a jolt through me, a reminder of everything I had been ignoring all day. "Want to take a walk?" she asked, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I hesitated, glancing at the others heading back toward the hotel. Then I looked at her. Her eyes sparkled in the dim streetlight, and her lips curved into a smile that was both playful and serious. "Yeah," I said finally. "Let's walk." And just like that, I stepped off the safe path and onto one I couldn't turn back from. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes in small towns after dark. The restaurants had closed their doors, leaving behind the faint smell of grilled meat and garlic drifting through the cool air. Above us, the sky stretched wide and dark, dotted with stars that seemed brighter than they ever did back in the city. Julia walked beside me, her heels clicking against the cobblestones. She had taken off her blazer, draped it casually over her arm, and the silk of her blouse clung to her in the dim light. The air carried a bite of autumn, and every now and then, her shoulder brushed against mine, sending small electric jolts through me. "Feels good to get away from the crowd, doesn't it?" she said, her voice softer now, as though the silence of the town demanded it. "Yeah," I replied. "I needed this." "Me too." She paused, looking around at the quiet streets. "Sometimes I feel like we spend half our lives pretending to be interested in things that don't matter. Seminars, meetings, reports. And then we forget to live." Her words struck something inside me. They weren't just casual complaints, they carried weight, like she was speaking a truth she rarely admitted. "Yeah," I said again, slower this time. "It's like, we get stuck in routines, and before you know it, years have gone by." Julia glanced at me, her eyes reflecting the glow of a nearby street lamp. "And do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd made different choices?" I felt my chest tighten. "All the time." For a few moments, we walked in silence, the air thick with unspoken things. I could hear my own heartbeat, faster than it should have been. We turned down a narrow side street, quieter still, where ivy crawled up the brick walls and the sound of our footsteps echoed against the stone. Julia stopped suddenly and leaned against the wall, tilting her head back, eyes closed for a moment as if savoring the night. "This town feels like it's holding secrets," she said, opening her eyes again to look at me. "Doesn't it?" "Maybe it is," I said, though I wasn't thinking about the town. She smiled faintly. "Or maybe it's us who are holding them." I swallowed hard. There it was, the line hanging between us. Dangerous, tempting, impossible to ignore. I stepped closer without thinking, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral with a hint of spice. She didn't move away. Her eyes locked on mine, unwavering. "Julia," I began, but I didn't know how to finish. "Yes," she whispered. I shook my head slightly, trying to regain control. "We shouldn't." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I know." But she didn't move. Neither did I. The silence stretched, heavy and fragile, like the moment before glass shatters. I could feel the heat of her body, the tension in the air. My mind screamed with warnings, "Anna. Your marriage. Don't do this." But my body leaned forward anyway, drawn like a moth to a flame. Just before our lips could meet, Julia placed a hand on my chest, stopping me. Her touch burned through the fabric of my shirt. "Not yet," she said softly. I froze, confused, breathless. She looked up at me, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You're not ready. And I don't want half of you, I want all or nothing." Her words cut deeper than I expected. For a moment, I felt both relieved and disappointed, a storm of conflicting emotions churning inside me. Then she pushed herself away from the wall and began walking again, slow and graceful, as though nothing had happened. "Come on," she said, glancing back with a teasing smile. "We'll be late for tomorrow if we wander too long." I followed, my heart still racing, my mind spinning. That moment, that almost kiss, hung in the air like a promise. Or maybe a threat. Either way, I knew one thing: something had changed between us tonight. And there was no going back. The hotel lobby felt emptier now, most guests already settled into their rooms or wandering off for their own dinners. Julia and I rode the elevator in silence, the small space amplifying the sound of our breathing. Her hand brushed mine accidentally, or maybe deliberately, when she shifted to adjust her bag. My pulse spiked, and I quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. The hallway was quiet, lit by warm lamps that cast long shadows across the carpet. Room numbers glowed faintly, almost hypnotic in the dim light. Julia stopped in front of her door, turned to me with that teasing smile that had become so familiar tonight, and said softly, "See you tomorrow?" I nodded. "Yeah, see you tomorrow." She leaned slightly closer, her shoulder touching mine, her breath warm against my cheek. "Good night." I watched her enter the room and close the door, then continued down the hallway toward my own room. But my legs felt heavier than they should, every step deliberate as though I were moving through syrup. When I reached my door, I fumbled with the keycard, my fingers shaking slightly. Inside, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment, trying to steady my racing heart. I told myself it was just curiosity, just a fleeting attraction. I would attend the seminar tomorrow, nothing more would happen, and everything would return to normal. But when I sat on the edge of my bed, loosening my tie, my thoughts kept drifting back to her. The way she had laughed during dinner, the way she had leaned in on the walk, the almost kiss that lingered in my mind like a spark in dry grass. I couldn't ignore it. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Julia. "Can't sleep. Want to talk?" I stared at the screen, frozen. My rational mind screamed, "Don't. Don't do this." But another part of me, a reckless, hungry part one had long ignored, pushed me toward the reply button. "Sure," I typed. What followed was a series of messages, casual at first, about the seminar, about what we had eaten, about how tired we both were. But gradually, the conversation shifted. We began to share personal thoughts, small secrets, tiny admissions of loneliness and desire. Each message made my chest tighter, my pulse faster. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped a little, my mind filling with possibilities I had sworn I wouldn't entertain. Before I knew it, Julia had suggested a late-night walk in the hotel corridor. "It's quiet here," she said. "We won't disturb anyone." I hesitated, but then curiosity and anticipation won. I slipped on my shoes and stepped into the hallway. She was waiting near the elevator, leaning casually against the wall. Her hair fell over her shoulders, her eyes sparkling with mischief and something more, something unspoken that set my blood on fire. "Ready?" she asked, voice low, teasing. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, though my stomach was twisting in knots. We walked slowly down the hallway, our conversation soft and intimate. She leaned closer to me several times, our shoulders brushing. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, the subtle fragrance she wore. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and I knew I should pull away. But every instinct in me leaned forward. At one point, she stopped and turned to face me, a mischievous smile on her lips. "You know," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear, "I've been thinking about you all night." My body reacted before my mind could protest. I took a deep breath, trying to slow the rush of adrenaline and guilt. "Julia," I started, but she silenced me with a look, one that spoke louder than words. "Shoo," she said, stepping even closer. "Let's just feel the moment." I couldn't resist. I leaned in, our faces inches apart. My hands found her waist, tentative at first, exploring the curve of her body. She pressed closer, her lips brushing mine in the softest, teasing way. It was a kiss that promised more, a dangerous invitation I had no right to accept, but I did. The hallway seemed to shrink around us, the soft carpet muffling our movements, the dim lights casting long shadows. Time slowed, and every touch, every sigh, every heartbeat felt magnified. My mind flashed with the image of my wife waiting at home, the life I had built with her, the vows I had taken. And yet, in that moment, none of it mattered. Julia deepened the kiss, and my hands roamed instinctively, brushing the fabric of her blouse, tracing the lines of her back. She let out a soft laugh, breathless, and whispered, "Careful, we could get caught." The thrill of risk only made it more intense. My rational side screamed at me, but my body didn't listen. Every nerve ending was alive, every sensation heightened. We were on the edge of something forbidden, intoxicating, and utterly consuming. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed in this liminal space between innocence and surrender. And when she finally pulled back slightly, her eyes searching mine, I realized that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Julia smiled faintly, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we'll see where this goes." I nodded, my own breathing ragged, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it could burst. I returned to my room, closed the door, and collapsed on the bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a whirlwind of guilt, desire, and anticipation. I knew one thing with absolute certainty: this trip was going to change everything. By the time I returned to my room, sleep was impossible. My body hummed with a restless energy, and my mind replayed every moment with Julia, the brush of her shoulder, her whispered words, the way her gaze had lingered on me in the hallway. I paced, ran my hands through my hair, and tried in vain to quell the tension coiling in my chest. Then my phone buzzed again. It was her. "I can't stop thinking about you. Come to my room." I froze. Rationality screamed, "Don't. You have a wife. This is insane." But another, darker part of me, the part one rarely acknowledged, whispered, "Go. Just once. Experience it." Against all reason, I stood and slipped my shoes back on. My heart thundered as I stepped into the hallway. The corridor was silent, the faint carpeted footsteps echoing as I approached her door. She was waiting, leaning against the wall, her hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes glinting with anticipation and mischief. "Hello," she whispered as I drew near. "Hi," I managed, my voice barely more than a breath. Her hand found mine instantly, intertwining our fingers. The touch was electric, sending jolts straight to my core. My pulse raced, and I knew I was already lost. She guided me inside, closing the door softly behind us. The room was dimly lit, the bedside lamp casting golden shadows across the walls. Julia's coat slid to the floor, and she approached me with a slow, deliberate grace. Her eyes held a mixture of desire and reassurance, a silent invitation I was powerless to resist. "Just, don't think," she murmured. "Feel." Her words were a command, but also a plea. I stepped closer, pressing my lips to hers in a kiss that started hesitant but quickly deepened. Every nerve in my body seemed alive, tuned to her touch, her breath, the heat radiating from her skin. My hands roamed, exploring the curve of her back, the line of her waist. She responded in kind, pressing herself against me, her lips trailing along my neck, teasing, urgent. I felt a surge of something raw, dangerous, addictive. Every rational thought about Anna, about my life at home, was eclipsed by the immediacy of this moment. We moved together toward the bed, a tangle of limbs and whispered words. Every kiss, every caress, every brush of skin sent shivers through me. The anticipation built slowly, almost torturously, as if the room itself had become a separate world where nothing else existed. "God, you're driving me insane," I muttered against her lips. She laughed softly, breathless. "And you like it?" Hours, or maybe minutes, I had lost count, passed in this private chaos. Clothing became irrelevant, barriers removed, and the intensity of our connection consumed everything. The tension, the thrill, the forbidden nature of it all made every sensation sharper, more vivid. I was acutely aware of her every movement, her every sigh, the way her body responded to mine. Even as desire took over, a flicker of guilt remained in the back of my mind. Anna. My life. My vows. But that guilt only seemed to heighten the experience, creating a dangerous push-pull that left me both exhilarated and terrified. When we finally collapsed against the sheets, spent and tangled, our breaths heavy and hearts racing, there was a moment of silence. Julia rested her head against my shoulder, her hand still holding mine. I should leave, I whispered, torn between longing and conscience. No, she said softly. Stay. Just for a little while. Nobody will know. Her words were a bomb and a poison all at once. I closed my eyes, letting the heat of her body, the rhythm of her breathing, and the intoxicating taste of wine and skin wash over me. In that moment, I realized how fragile everything was. One choice, one lapse of judgment, and I could destroy everything I had at home. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. Every fiber of me wanted to stay, to explore, to feel. We lay together until the early hours, speaking in whispers, laughing quietly, tracing each other's skin, learning the intimate geography of bodies and souls that should never have met in this way. By the time sleep finally claimed us, it was a hollow, exhausted surrender. I was aware of everything I had done, and yet, too drained and overwhelmed to regret it fully. The fire of desire had been quenched, but the embers would burn for much longer. And I knew, with a cold certainty beneath the heat of the night, that nothing would ever be the same. Morning light crept through the thin hotel curtains, pale and intrusive. I woke slowly, muscles sore, body still tingling from the night before. The room smelled faintly of perfume and wine, and I could feel the imprint of Julia's presence beside me. For a fleeting second, I allowed myself to linger in the warmth, to feel the softness of her hair brushing against my chest. Then reality hit like a cold splash of water. Anna. My wife. The life I had paused, the vows I had made, the trust one had shattered. My stomach twisted painfully, guilt and desire colliding in a storm I couldn't untangle. Julia stirred beside me, stretching lightly, her eyes half open, smiling sleepily. Morning, she whispered, her voice soft, intimate. I forced a smile, trying to mask the turmoil inside me. Morning, I said, my throat dry. We lay there for a few moments, bodies still close, hearts slowing from the rush of the previous night. It should have been comforting, a private bubble of warmth and tenderness. But all I could think of was how fragile it was, how dangerous, how wrong. I should go, I muttered finally, sitting up abruptly. Julia tilted her head, her hair cascading over her shoulder. Don't rush off, she said, almost teasing, but there was something softer behind the words. You have to live a little, don't you? I shook my head. No, I have to go home. I have a wife. She didn't argue. Instead, she leaned closer, placing a hand briefly on mine. I understand, she said softly. But, last night, it happened. And it was real. Don't let guilt steal all of it. Her words twisted inside me. Real? It was real, yes. The heat, the touch, the passion, it had all been undeniably real. But so were the consequences, so was the betrayal. I couldn't reconcile the two without feeling like my chest would split in half. I dressed slowly, every movement deliberate, each shirt button fastened with the awareness that I was leaving behind something electric, something I could never truly repeat. Julia was already up, gathering her things, her face calm and composed, almost as if the night had left no trace on her conscience. We exchanged a brief, awkward smile at the door. See you later, she said. Yeah, I muttered, avoiding her gaze. Walking to the elevator, my mind was a whirlwind. The hotel seemed quieter now, almost judgmental, as if it had witnessed the crime of our desire and disapproved. I pressed the keycard into the elevator slot and let the doors close, shutting out the room, and Julia, behind me. Back in my own room, I tried to collect myself. Anna would text me soon. She would ask about my sleep, my breakfast, maybe even about the seminar. And I would lie. Or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I'd tell her I was tired and needed rest. Either way, I couldn't reveal the truth, not fully. Not ever. I dressed quickly, packed my bags, and left the hotel, feeling the weight of my choices like stones in my chest. Every step toward the lobby, every turn on the sidewalk, reminded me of the night that had changed me. I could still feel Julia's hands, her lips, her body. And I knew that, no matter how far away I got, no matter how quickly I returned to Anna, the memory would linger. It was a paradox I couldn't escape. The night had been everything I had ever wanted, and everything I had promised myself I would never touch. I had felt alive in ways I hadn't realized I was missing, but the price of that life was guilt and shame, a constant, gnawing ache beneath the surface of my consciousness. As the taxi carried me toward the station, I stared out at the passing city streets. People went about their routines, unaware of the storm inside me. I envied them. And yet, deep down, I knew that part of me had been awakened, something that could never be turned off again. Anna would never know. But I would. And sometimes, the knowledge of your own choices is a heavier burden than the judgment of anyone else. By the time I stepped onto the train, my thoughts were scattered. The seminar, the city, the lights, the sounds, they all blurred together. All I could think of was the night with Julia, the heat, the thrill, the danger. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that life as I had known it was over. Something inside me had shifted, and there was no going back.